Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2022. This is a 2-month BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads, in which we read Star Trek fiction. Uh, and with a side mission, a sort of away mission of reading a nonfiction science work. Uh, and the first month of Book Trek 2022 is devoted to the wrath of Book Trek. It's devoted to Roddenberry-era Star Trek. The original series that ran for 3 seasons and then was canceled and then became a fan favorite and took on a second life in reruns. The movies that sprang from the original series, also Star Trek The Next Generation, the movies that sprang from that, the animated series, although there's been, aside from Alan Dean Foster, precious little fiction written about the animated series with animated series characters. Maybe for copyright reasons? I don't really know. And then Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Star Trek Enterprise. That group of 5 shows and all of its spin-offs is the concentration for the first month of Book Trek. And then next month, we will be dealing with all of the new Trek, all of the strange new worlds that Star Trek has gone to since the J.J. Abrams movie, since the Kelvin timeline began. And Book Trek, the Wrath of Book Trek for August still has a few days left in it. August has been absolutely brutal for most of the people in the world. Most of the people in the world have experienced the worst heat waves of their lives. In China, for instance, that is still going on with no end in sight. No possibility, really, of relief. And the places that haven't been charbroiling in record-breaking heat have been buried in floods. So I think that might explain why a lot of people seem to want August to be over. But it still has a few days left. And here at the end of Book Trek 2022, I want to do a little cheating for today. The nonfiction exception for Book Trek is The Away Mission, a book about science. But my book for today is also nonfiction, and it is an absolute classic. And I had to go back to it. I was looking at my Star Trek books. I was thinking, do you want to read a print book or do you want to spin the wheel for an ebook? And my eye caught on this thing and I realized it's been 25 years since I read it. So I read it again. I just recently found a mint condition copy of it in paperback and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I lived by this book for a long time. And so did a lot of other people I watched Star Trek in its original run, and I loved it. I fell in love with it in its original run. I was legitimately heartbroken when it got canceled. And like so many fans, I didn't want to let it go. And back in the mid-1970s, we didn't have much, those original fans. We had James Blish, basically. We had James Blish's adaptations of the Star Trek episodes, Star Trek 1, Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, and we had his novel, Spock Must Die. There was nothing really to write home about. I'm a bit of a heretic in science fiction circles by saying that James Blish, I don't think, ever wrote anything that was anything to write home about, but Spock Must Die certainly wasn't. And that was all we had. Those things sold like crazy. They sold the equivalent of a New York Times bestseller today because fans were desperate for anything at all, and they were making their own. The whole time that was happening, there were Star Trek fiction homemade, home-stapled, home-mimeographed fanzines before the show had even been canceled. And they exploded in number and popularity after that. But there were precious few books, and then this book came along. Star Trek Lives. This is Jacqueline Lichtenberg, Sonner Marshak, and Joan Winston, with a number of other hands at the soup kettle here. And this has all of the this paperback. I don't know how many different printings this has had. I don't want to block the beam, do I? This has all of the gorgeous original cover artwork for James Blish's Star Trek novels. We've seen a few of those. These are more of them. And this is a book, I don't know of many parallels like this. This is a fan book. This is about fans. It's about Star Trek fandom. As much as it's about anything else, as much as it's about the show or the creator, Gene Roddenberry, or any of the original cast, or any of what the cast did after the show was canceled, as much as it's about any of that, it's also about the fans. It's a nonfiction work, but it is unbelievably vibrant. If you came to Star Trek as a teenager with The Next Generation, or maybe even later shows, or God forbid you're so young that the Star Trek that you came to is New Trek, Kurtzman Trek, then this will be an extremely engaging look at what those earliest Wild West days were like, because this covers everything. It covers the things that are now called conventions that were really at the time just a bunch of half-drunk nerds in a hotel room with cold pizza. It covers all of the original tentative footsteps of Star Trek fiction, the earliest tentative steps towards maybe getting some sort of official recognition so that these things could be books, so that people writing Trek fiction could have a published novel to their name. It explores all of the original ideas of whether or not Trek would come back to the small screen, back to TV, back when there were only 3 networks, and antenna. Your television set had a pair of antenna that you had to position to get the picture to come in. And if you are a young person now, if you were born in the 21st century, oh my, you're not going to want to know what our version of a good picture looked like. But we didn't know. We didn't know any better. So, I did that more times than I can count. Fiddling with what we called the rabbit ears in order to get a better picture for a Star Trek episode, for a Star Trek rerun. This tells the story of all of that. Now, most of the stuff that's chronicled in here never went anywhere. Star Trek didn't get a burst of life inside it until the motion picture, which was huge and operatic. It packed people into the theaters. It was expensive, but it did manage eventually to make back money. And far more important than that, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, not only made back money, but showed people that Star Trek could be absolutely flat-out thrilling, and that was all it took. That was all it took to get to hook a new generation on the thing that had hooked us originally. I wasn't 100% sure that any of those intangibles that hooked the fans in this book would actually communicate to a different crew on a ship that's called the Enterprise, but it's effectively a different ship. I wasn't sure, in other words, about the Next Generation, and I think that ambivalence might account for how slow I was to embrace the Next Generation, because it felt different. Deep Space Nine, no Enterprise. Voyager, it's a different ship. Star Trek Enterprise, it's an earlier Enterprise. It's not continuity, because Captain Pike's Enterprise is the first Enterprise, or Captain April's, but I'll still take it, because it doesn't look like NCC 1701. But Star Trek The Next Generation, I remember thinking, I'm supposed to acclimate myself to a new crew on the Enterprise? And it took a long time for me to realize that doesn't actually detract from my crew on my Enterprise at all. It's just more riches. And oh my God, was it fun to go back to this book and remember these days. Remember the days when, because the title here is as much a planted flag as it is anything else. When this book came out in 1974, 1975, Star Trek did not live. It was in reruns, but it had nowhere else. And not anyone, not even the biggest believer in Star Trek, which would be Sandra Marchak, not even the biggest believer in Star Trek back then, would have guessed a multi-billion-dollar industry. Not in a million years. Not in a million years. When we were watching the original show, and mention is made that World War III erupts from proxy wars, brushfire wars on the Asian continent, and engulfs the world in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, when we were watching this original show, none of us thought that we would live to see the year 2022, much less that in 2022 Star Trek would be a household name and $1 billion property. So all of that is in the future in this book, and that I remember reading my original copy of this, and I read it until it fell apart. I got a second copy. What did this cost? $2 something, right? Yeah, $2, $1.95, which was money. That was money back then, and I waited until I could justify it, and then I bought a second paperback, an extravagance I almost never did. I got that new paperback home and thought, well, I can get rid of my old paper. My old paperback was cracked in the spine. It had dog-eared pages, had pages falling out. I thought, I can get rid of this because I have this new one. So I got rid of my old copy. I took the rubber bands off it and I threw it away. in the metal garbage cans that we had then. I threw it away. And I think the very trip back to the house, I think I walked it out to the garbage, threw it away. It was a bit of a pang, a bit melancholy. And I think that was the very moment when I walked in the door to my room and saw that my beagles had destroyed my brand new copy. They'd eaten it, turned to shreds. So I had a stern talking to with them. I believe I called them I compared them to tribbles, and waited a while, and then bought yet another copy. And God knows where any of those copies are. I bought many others over the years, but this looks like the day it was made. So, and I found it at the Brattle just recently. Is that right? Did I just recently? Yeah, I found this at the Brattle or somewhere just recently. So I grabbed it and I reread it. I was very gentle, and I relived those days, which are gone now, and soon the fiction that they gave rise to will also be gone. Once we hit September, Book Trek will deal with a completely different Star Trek. And it won't matter that some of the names are the same. That won't matter at all. We'll be talking all about it in September, but oh my, I don't think Star Trek Lives is still in print. I don't know why it wouldn't be. It's sold like the Dickens, but I don't think it's still in print, but I don't think it's hard to find as a secondhand copy, and you should find it. Oh my. If you're interested in Star Trek, especially if you're interested in the very earliest days of Star Trek, then you've got to read this book. I had such a blast reading all of the incidents. It's kind of scattershot. It's not a narrative history. It's kind of scattershot with fans being relating breathless encounters with Leonard Nimoy or with William Shatner, or lots and lots of quotes from the original cast about the show. Sometimes very early quotes, obviously. The quotes from the cast, from some writers, from Roddenberry himself, and a lot of those early fans. The quotes that are in this book obviously take place before anybody knew that fan pressure, that fan passion would revive Star Trek. Nobody knew that was going to happen. So those quotes are the earliest of their provenance, and therefore very, very interesting. It's so much fun to read. A little bit melancholy again, obviously. When you have South Boston Irish Catholic in your veins, melancholy is just one phone call away. I was reading this, and I was remembering those Beagles. I was mad at them for a whole afternoon. And I'd give anything to have them back. I'd give anything to see them all again. But not only that, but also reading all of the quotes in this book. Most of the original cast is dead. Chekhov and Kirk are alive, but no one else. They're all gone. And it's amazing to see them here when they were not only alive, but young. Full of pep and energy, full of a kind of benign curiosity, especially on Leonard Nimoy's part, towards this fandom. Keep in mind, there had been no such thing outside of professional sports. No one even really understood at first that Star Trek had a fandom. There wasn't even that word. That had not occurred to anyone, that it would exist, that its energy might bring a show back from the dead, and also, if you're a Paramount suit, that there's money to be made from fandoms. It was only in the 21st century, it was only really from 2015 on, that creatives and Paramount executives, studio executives, said, not only can you get a lot of money out of a fandom, but you can please 12 psychos with blue check marks on Twitter if you betray your fandom. If you intentionally betray them, draw up a short list or a long list of the things they have loved most about this thing that you only get to make because they made it popular. Draw up that list and then absolutely betray and contradict every single discrete item on that list. Whether it's Star Trek or Doctor Who or the Terminator or you name it. You name it, draw up a list and do that. But only after around 2015. Before that, not only would that have been considered bad business sense, which it certainly is, but also it would have been considered an incredible moral betrayal. Why on earth would you do that? We wouldn't have this product, this billion-dollar product, to pay for our own mortgages if it weren't for the original organizing love and devotion of those fans. Of all the people in the world, why would you betray them? I don't have an answer to any of those questions, but we'll be exploring it in due time. Certainly none of that is here. None of that is even guessed at here. When this book came out, the suits at Paramount had no idea that Star Trek was a valuable property. And so it was wonderful to relive. It's a bit of a break of the rules here. My co-host will have to indulge me. This is not fiction. I will go back to fiction for the rest of Book Trek, but I had to go back to Star Trek Lives. So I'm going to wrap. That is my Book Trek book for today. I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, Book Trek.